Hello everyone, it's Mr. Wulfy here, and I am going to discuss with you today, well, let's just say that this is going to be a new project that I am going to be engaging in on my free time and in my YouTube time. And I intend to try out a variety of diet and eating plans, study them extensively, and make sense of whether or not they're actually doing the things they say they're going to do, and whether or not they're actually good ideas in the long run. Now, the first thing I started with was a vegan diet. Now, as a vegan diet, it implies that there are absolutely no animal products involved in any of the foods that you're eating. So, that includes, meat, dairy, eggs, and honey, specifically. And there's probably more here and there, but this is going to be this is partially an anecdotal an opinion-based research project, so don't take everything I say as like the quintessential this is the truth. The big thing about vegans is the ethical issues involved with it, and I'm just gonna leave all that out of there because there's no reason to talk about that for me, because I'm focused purely on the scientific nutrition-based aspects of said diets. Information can be gained through experience more efficiently than, say, just reading. So in order to properly tell people in the future this is what this diet is all about, if they were to ask me about it, I found that it would be better if I had experienced it rather than just read about it a whole bunch, so that I could give more adequate information and personal basis for the information. So that's what really got me started with the idea of doing this project, or this eating plan. So the goals were to eliminate, and I had to do kind of a detox prep towards this, because just dropping any and all animal products out of your diet, and even I've never been a big animal product eater. Like I've been on almond milk for quite some time, just because I don't like cow milk, mostly because the lactose bothers my stomach, things like that. So I switched to almond milk a while back. So that was the first step, really. And I never really was a big meat eater to begin with. So it's a transition effect. You want to cut out an animal product or two per week, maybe. So you want to stop eating eggs for breakfast, stop eating bacon for breakfast, just eat like oatmeal and fruit, and just cut out milk, and then you start, when you get all the solid products like the whole meats and the whole eggs and all that kind of thing out of your diet, then you start looking at labels and making sure that what you're eating does not contain egg or milk, which is very tricky because most commercial bread products do contain eggs, and a lot contain milk, and a lot of prepared things contain eggs and milk. So the best thing to do is just cut those out altogether if you're really trying, and then maybe doing some research to find out more information as you progress to make sure that you're doing the right thing. The two things that I honestly, and this is just anecdotal personal opinion, I missed cheese and eggs quite a bit because I'm a big egg eater. Now, the layout and the parameters for this experiment were, I picked a day, and from that day I went 30 days without eating meat or dairy or eggs or honey. So that was the time frame. So it's 30 days, and then the acceptable foods were basically anything from the bread, vegetable and fruit group, and even some processed foods that did not contain those products. So that leaves a good variety of foods there, because what you're really kicking out is that section in the food guide. The food guide pyramid has the triangle on top, and then a section here, then a bigger section here, then a big section at the bottom. That's just taking out that section right there, really. So it's easy enough to find plenty of food that's viable options out of the other groups. I'll also laid out some other parameters, which were, I cut out caffeine, no supplementation, so no vitamins and mineral supplements that were like actual vitamin intake. We'll get to the the fortified products in a little bit, because there were some involved, because there was one important nutrient above all others that's lacking in the vegan diet that a lot of people don't even think about. And that's where a lot of people fail on a vegan diet, because they just jump into it without doing the research. So we're going to get to that in a minute. But I think right now the best thing to do, and I have what I'm looking at, I'm going to not lie to you, I have a piece of paper with like my layout here, because I'm terrible at keeping a keeping a train of thought going. My train of thought derails quite efficiently. In fact, if that was a thing that you could do, what am I talking about right now? I think the main thing to talk about right here would be the kinds of foods I was eating on the diet. And I primarily ate fruit, starchy vegetables, and bread, just because they provide the most energy. And it was a mostly carbohydrate diet. Now, in the closing arguments, I'll get into it more, but my body seems to function quite well on a mostly carbohydrate diet. And a lot of people probably don't, for various reasons, genetics and the like. But, for me, it was an easy transition. I ate, for instance, bananas were a staple food. I ate probably around 10 bananas a day. I would eat a handful of other fruits here and there. I would eat lots of potatoes, beans, nuts, corn, a variety of plant-based foods that are high in calories for either the carbohydrate content or the fat content. And I would prepare them using vegetable oils if that was an option. Actually, I found a really interesting recipe for potatoes. If anybody's interested, I can share that later. But it's like super low fat and delicious, and anybody would probably like it because it tastes like potato chips or something without all the added bad stuff. And you're just like, oh my god, how did I not know about this? Then I would eat a lot of pasta, rice, whole grains. Let me give you a typical breakfast. A typical breakfast when I first get up in the morning was a banana. I would have to go to work, which would take about 30 minutes of driving and preparation and driving. And then I would eat another banana. Then I would eat some oatmeal. And that was just kind of like spreading it out like that. It gives you more energy, keeps you full longer, and the like. And it was just, it also was easier for me because of my particular work schedule and all that. I didn't really have much free time to sit down and eat like this huge honking Denny's Grand Slam plate of breakfast or anything. So it was more like 100 or a couple hundred calories here and there and everywhere. And that's really how I eat throughout the day. And I think that's one reason this diet was successful for me and why I was already, kind of pre-prepped for the shift itself. And throughout the day, at different intervals, I would just eat a banana or another piece of fruit. My favorite fruit is peaches. If anybody wants, that's for me. I like peaches. I love them. What I would do is I would make a lot of smoothies as well. So I would put a banana and like a whole can of peaches that are the canned in juice, and I would actually wash off most of the juice so it wasn't added sugars as much as possible. Although I wasn't cutting out added sugars, they're not necessary when you're eating that much fruit. So I would pour them, blend them, make that a smoothie, and that would be a meal in and of itself. Not really like a meal, but a in-between meal, because I was eating like consistently throughout the day, and you kind of have to maintain your energy levels, because when you're not eating animal products, you're not getting a high fat and high protein level of energy. You're getting a high carbohydrate content. Now that's not to say that protein is not present, because I actually have a diagram and I'll put it up on the video, but protein is actually present in anything that is alive or was once alive or was part of something alive, because protein is in every single cell of living organisms. It must be, because it is a component of DNA, among other things. Actually, that's amino acids. So there is no food source that is unprocessed that is devoid of protein. Most fruits, most servings of fruit have about 1 gram. A banana has a little more than 1 gram, close to 1.5 grams if you're eating a kind of a medium-sized. The banana most people would eat one sitting. Alright, so what you really want to know is how much my body was affected by the diet itself. And I've always been around 150. At the time I began the diet, I was actually close to 155. We'll actually round up to 155 because most mornings when I woke, or some mornings when I woke up, I actually weighed that much. So I went from 155 to the last day that I actually decided that, that would be the last day. I weighed 147 that morning. So I lost a total of 8 pounds over the course. Actually, half that weight, if not most of it, went off within days and just kind of stayed off, and I've still kept it off. Like a couple weeks of going back to eating fairly normal, and I weighed like 148 this morning, and I didn't change my diet. I mean my exercise level, just my diet. So it shows how much little subtle things like that can affect your entire state of well-being and everything. As far as strength is concerned, I didn't lose any relevant muscle mass as far as I can tell, because I frequently work out. I go to the gym 2 to 3 nights a week, and I'm working out with the same exact weights, same reps. In fact, I went up in a few degrees. I don't have any numbers to show you really. I guess we could go by my squat weight. I was working out with 225 just because I haven't got back to heavy yet because of my knee and my back. But I was working out with 225 then, and I'm still working out with 225 now, doing the same basic stuff because I wasn't really focused on gaining. And really, eating like this is not a great way to gain anyway because it requires a higher volume of food intake than I was getting to actually make much of a difference as far as mass, muscle mass, and all that stuff. Because muscle is very expensive to upkeep. But my stamina level kind of went up a little bit. And I'm believing that's because of the higher carbohydrate content of the food and the more consistent and more spread out way that I was eating the foods. Now, I wasn't getting any real supplements, but I was drinking a particular fruit juice. I think it was like Bolthouse Farms, and it was kind called Red. It was a red one, and it was, what was it? Multi-V Goodness or something like that. And it's very, very good beverage, and it actually contains vitamin B12 in a large amount, which is very important because a vegan diet is missing out on vitamin B12 because B12, as far as humans are concerned, is really just coming out of animal products. And that's mostly because it's produced in the mouth via bacteria. And humans, for some reason or another, do not have those bacteria or produce that vitamin. It's kind of like how vitamin K is produced in your intestines and vitamin D is produced in your skin when it's exposed to sunlight. Except I believe we've lost it over time. And that's another thing entirely. We're not going to get into that. It's evolutionary biology. And that's going to take a whole video in and of itself. And I might get into that some other time. Who knows? But we'll go to cost effectiveness. And this is where I was really interested because a lot of people believe that to eat the right kinds of, to get enough food on a plant-based diet, you have to spend more money, which is not the case at all. It's actually more cost efficient to get a massive, you could get a massive volume of food for the cost that you would lose buying meat and dairy. Now, if you're buying meat and dairy substitutes like soy products and almond milk and stuff like that, that's roughly the same cost. But if you're just taking it out of the equation and just eating something else entirely that's not, the yin to the yang, then you can actually save a lot of money. And as an example, I brought up and did some calculations involving a pound of hamburger versus a pound of bananas. Now, a pound of hamburger roughly is, I have a piece of paper here. Where do you go? A pound of hamburger meat is roughly $2.39 a pound here right now-ish. And a pound of bananas is roughly 50 cents a pound. Now, a pound of hamburger meat has 1,152 calories. And this is like an 80-20, 80% lean meat, 20% fat hamburger meat. So it's not even that bad as far as volume. Anyway, 77.88 grams of protein and 90.72 grams of fat are present in a pound of hamburger meat. In a pound of bananas, you get roughly 1.44 grams of fat and 5 grams of protein. But once again, going back to the fact that bananas have about a gram of protein per banana, and there's roughly 4 bananas in a pound. Depending, it depends on the size of the banana. And there's no 2 bananas that are the same exact dimensions. But roughly, you can make the estimate that it's somewhere between 3 and 5, so that would be 4 bananas in a pound. So there's that. But there's roughly 400 calories in a pound of bananas as opposed to 1,152 in a pound of hamburger meat. However, if you go by cost, which 50 cents for a pound of bananas and $2.39 for a pound of hamburger meat, that means 4.78 pounds of bananas equal the same cost as a pound of hamburger meat. In 4.78 pounds of bananas, you would get 1,912 calories, which is almost 800 calories more than the hamburger meat. And in 4.78 pounds of bananas, you would get 23.9 grams of protein, which is still a significant amount of protein. It's not quite 77.88 grams, but there you go. You would also get, and this is quite an impressive number, 52.58 grams of fiber if you were to eat all 19.12 bananas in the 4.78 pounds of bananas. nobody wants to eat just bananas. This is just a comparison to show reference of, cost versus volume of food involved. And you don't have to cook bananas either, so you could just, have 19.12 bananas sitting around the house and eat them throughout the day. Now, I don't advise that. I'm just saying. If it's something like potatoes, dried beans, rice, you get an even higher volume of calories with, an equally small amount of fat, but the nutrient ratio is usually still really good for this amount of calories that a pound of hamburger meat provides. Now, you're missing out on several key nutrients such as iron, calcium, of course protein, and certain other, certain B vitamins, things like that. But that can be solved simply by combining certain types of vegetable foods and certain types of bread foods and certain types of fruit foods. And you don't even have to have the bread foods. You can just eat the right kinds of fruits and vegetables. So for me, it was fairly easy to transition because I live in the South. We've always had a high starchy vegetable diet. I've never had a problem eating rice, eating pasta, eating fruits and vegetables just in general. And I've never been a huge meat eater. So it was more of a, just remembering not to add things to the meals that I didn't want to be there for the purposes of the experiment. So instead of a big hunk of, instead of like a fried pork chop on the plate, I would eat more beans, more of some sort of grain food, or a serving of nuts, something to that degree that would provide some protein and fat. If I was, trying to add fat, if I was using the nuts, and still not count as an animal product. So that was easy enough because I've never, ever, ever had a problem. Peanut butter is an absolute staple food. I could go every day of my life eating peanut butter and banana sandwiches and just be perfectly happy, and it would pretty much cover all your nutrient needs. There's just a handful of vitamins and minerals that are missing out of the diet made up of peanut butter and banana sandwiches. And I think we can all agree that peanut butter and banana sandwiches are pretty awesome. There are definite benefits to a vegan diet, not the least of which is cost, like we said earlier, but also the fact that your body overall gets rid of a lot of toxins. If you eating a high meat diet, especially the way they're processed nowadays in America, just for starters, can cause up a lot of toxin buildup. Eating a high protein and high fat diet causes a lot of clutter in your organs. A high cholesterol diet causes your organs to work very hard. There's actually a scene in Super Size Me where the man goes to the doctor, and the doctor checks out his liver, and his liver is actually having the same symptoms of a high-level alcoholic because he's eating such a high-fat diet. Such a diet can be really harmful to the organs. So it draws back and takes a lot of that out of the equation, and you can add just as much fat as you want in the form of oils and things, and by eating nuts, and by eating just a volume of foods that contain fats naturally without going overboard, especially with the saturated fat department. So that's a benefit. Another benefit being the high fiber content of the diet, because most Americans especially do not get the amount of fiber they need in a day. They get a fraction of it, if any at all, in some instances, because most of the processed bread products and other grain products like rice and the like, the fiber is taken out. And most people don't eat fresh fruits and vegetables in the volume they would require to get the amount of fiber that they need. So eating a high fruit and vegetable and whole grain diet definitely puts on the fiber. When you take out the meat and the dairy, then you have to replace it with things. So you just eat a higher volume of the other things. So it makes sense that it's just like boom, boom, all this other good stuff that I needed is getting its way back into my diet. So that's definitely another benefit. Now there are drawbacks. Veganism is a luxury diet. A lot of vegans don't see it as that. They see it as maybe a more natural way of eating. And scientifically, we'll go back into evolutionary biology in another video, but scientifically, anything that you do, anything that people do, period, is natural because we are natural. There is no, real differentiation. It's all semantics. In a first world society where there's, supermarkets and other places where you can acquire whatever kind of foods you could choose, of course you can opt out for veganism, and it's not enough, it doesn't have any negative effects on you because you can eat plenty of this, that, and combine foods to get the right protein ratios and the right vitamins and minerals. You can have supplements to cover any holes in your diet, and it's okay, it's all good. But for people living, say, in harsher climates that don't have access to supermarkets, even for people living in third world countries where they're literally starving to death, that option is not open to them. So that is, that's something to take into consideration. This is all going back to, can you function on a vegan diet and how does it work and all that sort of thing. And that's what I wanted to get across. And yes, my findings show that you can. I feel, there was no physical drawbacks to cutting out meat and dairy and increasing my fruit, vegetable, and bread intake. And actually, the bread intake didn't really increase. It was the fruits and vegetables that increased. I ate more salads, more fruit salads, more smoothies made of fruit, more starchy vegetables. I had some interesting recipes for soups that I took advantage of, that sort of thing. So it's really easy to at least trade off several servings a day of, say, meat or dairy for fruits and vegetables and get the same benefits you would get anyway. So as far as closing arguments go, I would recommend at least trying it before you say you don't like it. I mean, if you like meat, that doesn't mean you have to stop eating meat. Just maybe cut back on it. It's very difficult to be vegan and bodybuild. It's possible because a serving of nuts, a serving of beans, you got your soy, that sort of thing provides very adequate protein. A basic serving of nuts is about 7 grams of protein. A basic serving of beans is about 7 to 10 grams of protein, and they provide roughly the same amount of calories as a serving of meat. So you can use them as meat substitutes very easy, and dairy substitutes very easy. So you don't need the cheese or the beef to get the protein you need. Now, the problem there is you have to combine certain proteins from that food with proteins from another food, because the amino acid spectrum isn't as adequate as you would have preferred. But that goes back to just volume and variety. So my recommendations would be, this would be a very good diet to use as a short-term weight control or weight loss program. Pretty quickly and pretty efficiently without actually inhibiting natural health-based processes, which a lot of crash diets and the Atkins diet and things like that do. You need the carbohydrates, at least in some amount, some smaller amounts, to function. Every cell in your body uses glucose. So that's basic biology. So you can synthesize glucose through the metabolism of protein and fat, but it doesn't really work as efficiently as your body would like. So it doesn't like to use that primarily. Another drawback is that it never really felt like I was full. But that was a good thing too, because that would lead me to eat more here and there throughout the day. And that also goes back to it being a luxury diet. But if I ever got hungry, I would just eat a serving of fruit. I would go grab some kind of bread, something like that, a handful of nuts, and just constantly graze throughout the day. Some say this is a more natural and healthful way to eat, but in the society we live in, it doesn't actually become an easy thing to do. You know what I'm saying? You have to actually find time to sit down and eat in a lot of the hectic lifestyles that people have. So that also goes back to it being a luxury diet, and the fact that you don't have the time to just eat the high volume of food that is available. So it can be there, and you can still not be able to get it all in, and so you're, have a calorie deficit throughout the day as a result. I suppose we should look at the frequently asked questions involving vegan diets, which all really come down to nutrient composition. Where do you get your protein? And I'll show some answers here. Where would you get your iron, however you want to say it. I'm from the South, I'm sorry. Where would you get your calcium and B12? And the B12 one is the one where you have to sit back and go, okay, this is why this isn't the natural way that humans eat. It's not the base form of human diet, because B12 must be supplemented. Anyway, I hope I hit all the high points. I'm going to show some diagrams throughout the video. You should have seen them already, but this is just my closing arguments, so I haven't been able to put them in there yet. But I'll show food grade pyramids and compare and contrast certain food groups, that sort of thing. And I hope that you might have learned a little bit from this. I know I learned a lot, and if you have any questions, ask them in the comments maybe, and I can answer them or whatever you want to do. If you don't even want to comment at all, I like it when people comment though, because when you rate, comment, and subscribe to my videos, it helps me out a lot. Because every little, even if you dislike a video, you're actually helping a person out, because it shows up on their feed, I didn't like this, and then somebody's like, why didn't they like it? I want to go watch it. And then they may, they may like it or dislike it. And it doesn't matter where that little bar is at the dislike and like thing, because I like doing this, it's funny on the camera, because it actually counts the same, just so you know. So like, dislike, do whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Do something though, please. Anyway guys, this has been Mr. Wulfy. I don't really know what to call this series yet, but we'll come up with a good name. And peace out. Love you guys.